I stood in the elevator alone, watching the numbers climb to the 12th floor where my best friend Jill had just moved in. The elevator stopped suddenly on the 5th floor. The doors slid open, and there was my husband Thomas, holding hands with a stunning woman I had never seen before. They were laughing, completely at ease, until our eyes met. Thomas froze, color draining from his face. The woman, noticing his sudden change, whispered audibly, "Who's that?" I found my voice somehow and said, "I'm his wife." Time seemed to stop in that elevator. Thomas looked like he might pass out, his mouth opening and closing without words coming out. The beautiful woman dropped his hand immediately, her perfectly made-up face transforming from confusion to horror as she processed my words. "Annemarie," Thomas finally managed, his voice strangled. "I thought you were working from home today." "Clearly," I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded when inside my heart was shattering into a million pieces. 7 years of marriage flashed before my eyes. 7 years with the man I had believed was my soulmate, my partner, my future. The woman took a small step back, her eyes darting between us. She was younger than me, maybe late 20s to my 34, with the kind of effortless beauty that came from youth and expensive tastes. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught the elevator light, sparkling accusingly. "I was just showing Jessica one of our new projects," Thomas said quickly, the architect in him constructing an explanation as fast as his guilty mind could manage. "She's a potential client." Jessica looked surprised at this statement, her perfectly arched eyebrows rising slightly before she caught herself. "Yes, I'm interested in commercial spaces," she added unconvincingly. I simply stared at them both, unable to form words. My husband, Thomas, who had kissed me goodbye this morning saying he was heading to Philadelphia for a client meeting, was clearly not in Philadelphia. He was in my best friend's building, holding another woman's hand, looking at her the way he used to look at me. Just then, the elevator lurched violently and came to a complete stop. The lights flickered briefly before stabilizing, but we weren't moving. We were trapped between floors. "Perfect," I muttered, pressing the emergency button repeatedly. A crackling voice came through the intercom. "We're aware of the issue and working on it. Should have you out in about 45 minutes. Is everyone okay in there?" "No, we are not okay," I wanted to scream. Instead, I managed a tight, "We're fine." The next 45 minutes were excruciating. Thomas tried to control the situation by occasionally whispering to Jessica, who kept her eyes fixed on her designer shoes. I leaned against the back wall of the elevator, arms crossed, watching them both. My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Who was she really? How many other lies had he told me? I thought about our conversation this morning. Thomas had been so convincing about his Philadelphia meeting, even mentioning which train he was taking and promising to call me when he arrived. He had packed an overnight bag. Had he planned to spend the night with her, in this building? When the elevator finally jerked back to life and descended to the lobby level, Thomas turned to me with pleading eyes. "Annemarie, let me explain later, please. This isn't what you think." Without waiting for my response, he quickly guided Jessica out of the elevator and across the lobby, his hand on the small of her back in a gesture so familiar, it made me sick. I watched them leave, feeling like I was watching my life walk away too. My phone buzzed. It was Jill wondering where I was. With trembling fingers, I texted her to come down. When she arrived in the lobby minutes later, her smile faded instantly upon seeing my face. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pulling me toward a quiet corner of the lobby. "I just saw Thomas," I managed to say, my voice breaking. "With another woman. They were holding hands, Jill, and then we got stuck in the elevator together." Jill's expression changed from concern to something else, something that looked suspiciously like guilt. She hesitated, then said, "Annemarie, I need to tell you something. I've seen Thomas here before. Several times, actually. I assumed he was visiting a client since there are so many businesses in this building, but now, her words hit me like a physical blow. Thomas had been coming here regularly, right to my best friend's building, and I'd had no idea. My entire world was unraveling faster than I could process. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "At least 2 months," Jill admitted. "Since shortly after I moved in. I'm so sorry, I should have mentioned it, but I never suspected anything like this." 2 months. While I had been working from home, building our life together, Thomas had been building another life right under my nose. The realization made me feel physically ill. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, ongoing deception. "I need to go home," I said suddenly, gathering my purse. "I need to figure out what's going on." Jill insisted on calling me a car, worried about my state of mind. As I rode home in silence, I scrolled through my phone, looking at pictures of Thomas and me, searching for signs I might have missed. We looked happy. We had been happy, or so I thought. When had things changed? When had I become so blind? Our house felt empty and cold when I arrived, though it was a warm spring day. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, seeing everything differently now. Our wedding photo on the mantel, Thomas's coffee mug still in the sink from this morning, his running shoes by the door. All these domestic artifacts now seemed like props in a play I hadn't realized I was performing in. I sat down at our shared home office desk and opened the laptop. I knew Thomas's passwords, just as he knew mine. We had never kept secrets from each other, or so I had believed. I hesitated only briefly before logging into our joint bank account. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 2 months, Thomas had withdrawn a total of $15,000 in cash. Small amounts each time, never enough to raise immediate alarm, but adding up to a significant sum. Money we had been saving for a down payment on a vacation home. Next, I checked our credit card statements. There were charges at restaurants I'd never been to, stores I didn't recognize. One charge in particular caught my eye, a jewelry store downtown with a charge of $2,300 from 3 weeks ago. Not once had Thomas mentioned buying jewelry. I certainly hadn't received any. My hands shook as I moved to his desk drawer. It was locked, which was unusual. Thomas had never locked anything from me before. I rummaged through my key drawer until I found a small brass key I didn't recognize. It fit perfectly. Inside the drawer were receipts for hotel stays in the city, dinner reservations, and a small velvet box, empty. I imagined the contents adorning Jessica's wrist in that elevator and felt sick all over again. Hours passed as I pieced together evidence of a life Thomas had been living parallel to our marriage. When I heard his key in the door, I didn't move from the office. I waited, surrounded by the paper trail of his betrayal. "Annemarie?" he called out, his voice tentative. When he found me in the office, his eyes immediately took in the open laptop, the scattered receipts, the empty jewelry box. His face hardened. "I can explain all of this," he said, his tone suddenly businesslike. "Jessica is a client, an important one. Her firm is looking to build a new headquarters, and it would be the biggest contract our company has ever landed. Sometimes in business, you have to wine and dine clients." "Do you usually hold hands with your clients?" I asked coldly. "Do you buy them diamond bracelets with our savings?" "That's not what you saw," Thomas insisted, his voice rising. "You're twisting things because you're upset. The bracelet was a gift for you for our anniversary next month. I was going to surprise you." "Stop lying to me!" I shouted, standing up so quickly my chair crashed against the wall. "I saw you, Thomas, and apparently Jill has seen you at her building multiple times over the last 2 months. Were you wining and dining your client every single time?" Thomas's expression flickered between surprise and calculation before settling into something harder, more defensive. "You're being paranoid, Annemarie. This is exactly why I can't tell you about certain clients. You overreact and create drama out of nothing." His attempt to gaslight me, only fueled my anger. Nothing? You call $15,000 disappearing from our account nothing? You call lying about going to Philadelphia nothing? I never said I was going to Philadelphia today, he countered. You did. This morning at breakfast. Thomas shook his head, looking at me with exaggerated concern. Honey, I think you need to rest. You're confusing things. I told you I had meetings all day, but I never mentioned Philadelphia. I felt like I was going crazy. I knew what he had said. I remembered our conversation perfectly. But the confidence with which he denied it made me momentarily doubt myself. Was I misremembering? Was I overreacting? No. I refused to let him manipulate me this way. I grabbed my purse and a small overnight bag. Where are you going? Thomas demanded. To Jill's. I can't stay here tonight. I can't even look at you. Annemarie, don't be ridiculous. Come on, let's talk about this rationally. There's nothing rational about this situation, I said, pushing past him. Don't call me. I'll contact you when I'm ready. I spent that night on Jill's sofa, alternating between numbness and waves of excruciating pain. How could the man I trusted most in the world betray me so completely? How could he lie to my face with such conviction? The next morning, I scrolled through social media mindlessly, trying to distract myself, when a mutual friend's post caught my eye. It was a check, in at an upscale restaurant downtown from last week, with a group photo in the background. I zoomed in and felt my heart stop. There was Thomas, his arm around Jessica, both smiling widely. She was wearing a diamond bracelet that caught the light of the camera flash. I showed the picture to Jill, who confirmed what I already knew. That's definitely the woman from the elevator. I checked our credit card statement again. Sure enough, there was a charge from that exact restaurant on that exact date. A restaurant Thomas had specifically told me he'd never been to when I suggested it for our anniversary last year. Everything was falling apart, and with each new discovery, it became clearer that my marriage had been built on lies. Not just recent lies, but possibly years of deception that I had been too trusting to see. The next week passed in a blur of pain and confusion. I barely ate or slept, existing in a fog of betrayal and heartache. Thomas alternated between bombarding me with messages and ignoring me completely. His texts ranged from desperate apologies to angry accusations that I was overreacting and destroying our marriage over a misunderstanding. I replayed our relationship in my mind, searching for warning signs I had missed. There had been small moments, unexplained absences, sudden changes of plans, phone calls he took in another room. I had always trusted him, never questioned these things. Now, each memory was tainted with suspicion. Jill watched me spiraling with growing concern. You need to talk to a lawyer, she finally said one evening, as I stared blankly at my untouched dinner. My cousin Sarah specializes in divorce law. Let me set up a meeting. Divorce? The word felt foreign on my tongue. Despite everything, I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead. I don't know if I'm ready for that. You don't have to decide anything right now, Jill assured me. But you should know your options, especially since he's been moving money around. Sarah agreed to meet me the next day. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman with kind eyes that had seen too many cases like mine. I told her everything, showing her the financial records I had gathered. Based on these withdrawals and transfers, it looks like Thomas has been preparing for a separation for some time, Sarah said, her expression grave. These aren't impulsive moves. This is strategic financial planning. What do you mean? He's been moving assets, creating a financial cushion for himself. It's unfortunately common in cases where one spouse has been planning to leave the marriage. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Thomas hadn't just been having an affair, he had been systematically preparing to leave me. I recommend we file for an emergency injunction to freeze your joint assets, Sarah continued, and you should return home as soon as possible to secure any important documents or valuables. I agreed to follow her advice, but when I arrived at our house later that day, my key wouldn't work in the lock. Confused, I tried again before realizing what had happened. Thomas had changed the locks. I called him, furious. When he didn't answer, I left a scathing voicemail demanding he let me into my own home. An hour later, he texted back, "I'll drop off some of your things at Jill's. I think we need some space right now." Some space? He was locking me out of my own house while he continued his affair, and he thought we needed space? That night, back at Jill's apartment, I broke down completely. All the shock, anger, and pain I had been struggling to contain came pouring out in violent sobs that felt like they might tear me apart. Jill held me as I cried, offering tissues and whispered reassurances that eventually, somehow, things would be okay. I didn't believe her. How could things ever be okay again? My life as I knew it was over. My marriage, which I had believed was solid and loving, had been a lie. The future I had planned was shattered. I felt like I was drowning, unable to see any way forward. The doorbell rang around 9 o'clock that evening. Jill went to answer it, while I remained curled up on the sofa, too exhausted from crying to move. To my surprise, she returned with Mark, Thomas's best friend since college. "I hope it's okay that I came by," Mark said awkwardly, hovering near the doorway. "I've been trying to reach you." I nodded weakly, gesturing for him to sit. Mark had always been kind to me, though our friendship existed primarily through Thomas. I wondered if he had come to defend his friend or deliver some message. "I can't keep quiet anymore," Mark said, his voice tight with emotion. "I've been telling Thomas for months to come clean, but he keeps making excuses and promises he doesn't keep." I sat up straighter, suddenly alert. "What do you mean, for months?" Mark looked pained. "Thomas and Jessica have been seeing each other for almost a year, Annemarie." "I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner, but he kept saying he was going to end it, that it was just a fling." A year. Nearly a third of our marriage. The room seemed to tilt around me. "There's more," Mark continued, unable to meet my eyes. "Jessica thinks Thomas is divorced. He told her you and he split up last year, and the divorce was finalized a few months ago. He's been promising to marry her." The revelation felt like being doused with ice water. Thomas hadn't just been cheating on me. He had been living an entirely fabricated life, pretending to be divorced, promising marriage to another woman, all while coming home to me every night. "She's pregnant," Mark added quietly. 3 months along. "Thomas just told me last week." The room went silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Thomas was going to be a father, something we had discussed but decided to postpone until we were more financially stable. Apparently, he had made different plans with someone else. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally managed to ask. "Because it's gone too far," Mark said firmly. "Thomas is my friend, but what he's doing is wrong. And now he's talking about selling your house without telling you and moving Jessica into that condo he bought." "What condo?" I asked, feeling like I couldn't possibly absorb one more shock. "The one on Riverside Drive. He bought it 2 months ago under an LLC. Said it was an investment property, but he's been furnishing it for them to live in." Every word Mark spoke revealed another layer of Thomas's betrayal. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been meticulously building an entirely separate life, funded with our joint resources, planned with calculated precision. After Mark left, Jill held me as I cried again, but these tears were different. The devastation was giving way to something else. Anger. Pure, clarifying anger that burned away some of the confusion and pain. Thomas hadn't just broken my heart. He had stolen from me, lied to me, manipulated me, and planned to discard me. And somewhere in the city tonight, a pregnant woman believed she was building a future with my husband, just as deceived as I had been. For the first time since the elevator doors had opened on the 5th floor, I felt something beyond pain. I felt resolve. Thomas wasn't going to get away with this. I would fight back, not just for myself, but for the dignity of the life I had built and believed in. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since the elevator incident. Sarah had already filed the emergency injunction to freeze our joint assets, but there was more work to be done. I needed to understand exactly what I was facing financially and legally. We need to document everything, Sarah explained during our second meeting. Bank statements, property deeds, tax returns, insurance policies, anything that shows your shared assets and liabilities. I threw myself into the task, grateful for something concrete to focus on. Jill helped me create a detailed timeline of Thomas's activities over the past year, correlating his supposed business trips with credit card charges and social media posts that showed where he had actually been. 2 days into this process, a courier delivered an envelope to Jill's apartment. Inside were divorce papers filed by Thomas, claiming irreconcilable differences. More shocking was his claim that I had abandoned our marriage and home, using my stay at Jill's as evidence. He's trying to control the narrative, Sarah explained when I called her in a panic. This is actually good for us. It shows clear intent to mislead, especially since he changed the locks to prevent you from returning home. Thomas was attempting to paint me as unstable and himself as the victim. It was infuriating but also strangely clarifying. The man I had married, the man I thought I knew, was gone if he had ever existed at all. That afternoon, Jill received a call from a colleague at her advertising firm who needed a graphic designer for an urgent project. I recommended you, Jill told me. The pay is good, and they need someone who can start immediately. I hesitated. I hadn't worked for anyone but myself in years, having built a modest freelance business that allowed me to work from home while supporting Thomas's more demanding career. But now, I needed financial independence more than ever. I'll do it, I said, surprising myself with my decisiveness. The project was exactly what I needed, challenging enough to demand my full attention during the day, leaving me less time to dwell on the collapse of my marriage. The team liked my work, and by the end of the week, they had offered me a contract for 3 more projects. You should come to the office party next Friday, my new project manager suggested. Good chance to network, and, honestly, you look like you could use a night out. I agreed, though the thought of socializing made me anxious. I hadn't been out in public since the elevator incident, afraid of running into Thomas, or, worse, Thomas and Jessica together. My anxiety wasn't unfounded. The following day, while picking up lunch near my old house, I spotted Thomas's car parked outside a high-rise downtown. On an impulse, I parked nearby and waited. 20 minutes later, Thomas emerged with Jessica, his arm around her visibly pregnant belly, both laughing as they walked to his car. They looked happy, carefree, as if they hadn't destroyed someone else's life. I followed them at a distance, watching as they drove to an upscale building on Riverside Drive, the condo Mark had mentioned. I watched them enter together, looking for all the world like an excited couple preparing for their baby's arrival. I sat in my car for a long time afterward, processing what I had seen. Thomas hadn't just been having an affair. He had fully committed to a new life with this woman. A life funded by our joint savings, built on the foundation of our marriage. Later that day, Sarah called with updates on our legal strategy. We need more evidence of financial misconduct, she explained. His lawyer is pushing back hard on the injunction. I remembered Thomas's mother, Ellen, who had always been kind to me. We had remained close even as Thomas and his father had drifted apart over business disagreements. I hadn't spoken to her since the elevator incident, unsure of what Thomas might have told her. I took a deep breath and dialed her number. Annemarie, thank goodness, Ellen answered immediately. I've been so worried about you. Thomas says you're going through some kind of breakdown, but that doesn't sound like you at all. The concern in her voice brought tears to my eyes. Ellen, I need to tell you what's really happening, I said, and proceeded to explain everything from the elevator to the divorce papers. There was a long silence when I finished. I was afraid of this, Ellen finally said, her voice heavy with disappointment. He's doing exactly what his father did to me. What do you mean? Thomas never told you the real reason his father and I divorced, did he? Ellen asked. William had an affair with his secretary for years. When she got pregnant, he left me, claiming I had become unstable and difficult. He turned our friends against me, controlled the narrative. I felt a chill run through me. Thomas never told me that. He said you and William grew apart after he was born. Ellen laughed bitterly. Is that what he told you? No, Annemarie. William left when Thomas was 16. Thomas saw everything, the gaslighting, the financial manipulation, the lies. I always worried he had learned the wrong lessons from his father. The revelation stunned me. Thomas had witnessed his father's infidelity and its devastating effect on his mother, yet he was now inflicting the same pain on me. More disturbing was the realization that he had hidden this crucial part of his family history from me throughout our relationship. Has Thomas always been like this? I asked, dreading the answer. Ellen hesitated. There was an incident with his college girlfriend, Madison. She contacted me after they broke up, said Thomas had been seeing someone else while telling Madison they were exclusive. When confronted, he turned it all around, made Madison sound crazy for questioning him. Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of my marriage, but also a confirmation that I wasn't crazy or overreacting. Thomas had a pattern of behavior that predated our relationship, a pattern I had been completely blind to. I need your help, Ellen, I said. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. Ellen agreed without hesitation. William taught Thomas every trick in the book about hiding assets during a divorce. I'll tell you everything I know. By the time our call ended, I had pages of notes about potential hidden accounts, properties potentially purchased under business names, and tactics Thomas might use to undervalue our shared assets. Ellen also promised to send me any relevant documents she had kept from her own divorce that might help my case. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Dark circles under my eyes, hair limp, expression haunted. This was not who I wanted to be. This was not who I was going to let Thomas reduce me to. The next day, I booked an appointment at an upscale salon. 4 hours later, I emerged with a stylish new haircut, subtle highlights, and a sense of reclaiming something that had been taken from me. I signed up for a gym membership, found a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma, and bought new clothes that made me feel confident and strong. These were small steps, but they felt momentous. For the first time since the elevator doors had opened to reveal my husband's betrayal, I was making choices for myself, not just reacting to Thomas's actions. I was rebuilding myself, piece by piece, into someone who might eventually be whole again. 2 weeks later, I felt ready for the most difficult step yet, meeting Jessica face to face, by choice this time. Through Mark, who had become an unexpected ally, I managed to get a message to her requesting a meeting. To my surprise, she agreed. We met at a quiet cafe far from Thomas's usual haunts. Jessica arrived looking nervous, her hand protectively covering her baby bump. Up close, without the shock of the elevator moment, I could see she was actually closer to my age than I had initially thought, perhaps early 30s. Her eyes were red, rimmed, suggesting she had been crying. "Thank you for meeting me," I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I almost didn't come," Jessica admitted. "Thomas says you're unstable, that you've been harassing him since your divorce." "There is no divorce," I said simply, sliding my marriage certificate across the table, along with recent mail addressed to both Thomas and me at our shared home. "We're still very much married, Jessica. I only learned about you 3 weeks ago in that elevator." Jessica stared at the documents, her face draining of color. "But we've been together for almost a year," she whispered. "He showed me divorce papers. Probably the same ones he just filed against me, claiming I abandoned him," I replied. "Thomas is very good at creating whatever reality serves him best." For the next hour, we compared stories, piecing together a timeline of Thomas's elaborate deception. Jessica had met him at a charity event where he had introduced himself as a recently divorced architect. Their relationship had progressed quickly, with Thomas spending 3 or 4 nights a week at her apartment, claiming the other nights were spent at his office working late or traveling for business. "He proposed last month," Jessica said, twisting a diamond ring on her finger that I recognized immediately. It had belonged to my grandmother, a family heirloom Thomas had insisted on keeping in our home, safe for security reasons. Now I understood the real reason he had kept it from me. "When did you find out you were pregnant?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the pain lancing through me. "January," Jessica replied. Thomas was thrilled. He said it was perfect timing since his divorce was finalized in December. "We've been looking at houses, planning the nursery." Her voice broke. "I can't believe this is happening." I felt a surprising wave of compassion for her. Jessica was as much a victim of Thomas's manipulation as I was. She had built her life and future around the same lies that had destroyed mine. "There's more you should know," I said gently, and told her about the financial deceptions I had uncovered with Sarah and Ellen's help. Jessica listened in growing horror. "The condo on Riverside," she said suddenly. "Thomas said he bought it as an investment property that we could live in temporarily while looking for a house. He asked me to contribute $20,000 toward furnishing it, said it would be an investment in our future." $20,000. On top of the $15,000 Thomas had taken from our joint account, plus whatever he had embezzled from his firm, according to Mark's suspicions. The scale of Thomas's financial misconduct was staggering. "I have a proposition," I said finally. "I think we should help each other. You know things about Thomas's current activities that I don't, and I know things about his past and finances that you don't. Together, we might be able to protect ourselves from further damage." Jessica hesitated only briefly before nodding. "What do you have in mind?" We spent the next 2 hours formulating a plan. Jessica would document everything she knew about the condo purchase and any other properties or investments Thomas had mentioned. I would continue working with Sarah and Ellen to trace the money Thomas had hidden. We agreed to meet again in 1 week to compare findings. As we were preparing to leave, Jessica paused. "There's one more thing you should know," she said hesitantly. "Thomas has been selling some valuable items over the past few months. Art, antiques, things he said were from his former marriage that he wanted to get rid of. My grandmother's antique silver collection, the small but valuable art pieces we had collected during our travels, items that had mysteriously been moved to storage according to Thomas, but which I now realized he had sold off systematically. "I need to get back into our house," I said suddenly. "There are things there, important things, that I need to secure before they disappear too." The next day, with Sarah's guidance, I returned to my home with a police escort to retrieve personal belongings. Thomas, conveniently, was not there. As the officers waited patiently, I moved through the house in a daze, noting what was missing, what had been moved or changed in just 3 short weeks. My clothes were still in our closet, though pushed to one side to make room for what appeared to be Jessica's things. Family photos had been removed from the walls. My home office had been completely dismantled. My design equipment and files nowhere to be found. In the bedroom, I headed straight for the hidden wall, safe behind Thomas's grandfather's painting. To my relief, it was still there, though the painting had been replaced with a modern piece I didn't recognize. I entered the combination with trembling fingers, praying Thomas hadn't changed it. The safe swung open, revealing several empty spaces where jewelry and important documents had once been. My heart sank, but I kept searching, moving to the back of the safe, where a false panel concealed a second compartment. Thomas didn't know I knew about this feature, a quirk of the antique safe that the previous homeowner had mentioned when we bought the house. Behind the panel, I found a manila envelope containing our original marriage certificate, property deeds, and insurance policies documents I had been looking for since starting the divorce proceedings. More surprising was a second envelope filled with financial statements from accounts I had never seen before, in banks I didn't recognize. As I flipped through these statements, a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. Regular transfers from Thomas's architecture firm to these hidden accounts, amounts that seemed too large for normal salary deposits. According to these statements, Thomas had amassed over $200,000 in the past 18 months alone. I took photos of everything with shaking hands before returning the documents exactly as I had found them. As an afterthought, I checked the bottom drawer of my bedside table, where I kept a small jewelry box with pieces from my grandmother. As I expected, it was empty. Just as I was about to leave, my eye caught a glimpse of papers peeking out from beneath Thomas's side of the mattress. I lifted the corner and found a folder containing what appeared to be internal financial documents from his architecture firm. Skimming through them, I realized with growing shock that these were records of systematic embezzlement, client payments diverted to personal accounts, expense reports inflated far beyond actual costs, phantom projects with substantial budgets. This went far beyond hiding assets in a divorce. This was criminal activity that could result in serious charges. I photographed these documents as well before carefully replacing them exactly as I had found them. As I was escorted from the house, carrying only a small suitcase of clothes and personal items, I felt strangely lighter. The evidence I had just discovered would change everything. Thomas wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a criminal who had defrauded his firm, his clients, and me. The scale of his deception was breathtaking, but so was the clarity it brought me. This wasn't about love gone wrong or a marriage falling apart. This was about a predator who had targeted me, used me, and planned to discard me once I was no longer useful to him, the same way he had targeted Jessica and probably others before us. For the first time since that fateful elevator ride, I felt something close to gratitude. If those doors hadn't opened on the 5th floor that day, how much longer would I have lived in ignorance? How much more would I have lost before discovering the truth? The next day, I called an emergency meeting with Sarah, showing her everything I had found. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she examined the photos of the financial documents. "This changes everything," she said finally. "This isn't just about division of marital assets anymore. This is potential criminal fraud." "What should I do?" I asked, suddenly uncertain. Part of me wanted to expose Thomas immediately, to watch his carefully constructed world crumble the way mine had. Another part feared the consequences, not just for Thomas, but for everyone connected to him, including his unborn child. "For now, we focus on your divorce case," Sarah advised. "But we need to consider how and when to bring this other evidence to light. It could be powerful leverage, but it could also complicate matters." After careful consideration, I decided on a strategic approach. Through Sarah, I anonymously reported the financial irregularities to Thomas's firm, providing just enough evidence to trigger an internal audit without revealing the full extent of what I knew. The effect was immediate. 2 days later, Mark called to tell me Thomas had been suspended, pending an investigation into financial discrepancies at the firm. "He's furious," Mark reported. "He's convinced you're behind it somehow, but he can't prove anything." Good. Let him feel a fraction of the uncertainty and fear I had been living with. Let him wonder what else I might know, what other evidence might exist. Meanwhile, Jessica and I continued our information exchange, building a comprehensive picture of Thomas's assets and activities. She had discovered that the Riverside condo wasn't the only property he had purchased. There was also a vacation home in the mountains, registered under an LLC, that matched initials from the bank statements I had found in the safe. "He told me it was an investment property owned by friends that we could use occasionally," Jessica explained during our second meeting. "I had no idea he actually owned it." Together, we estimated Thomas had hidden at least $500,000 in assets between properties, bank accounts, and items sold off from our marriage. The scale of his financial deception was staggering, especially considering our supposedly transparent financial relationship. As Thomas's professional world began to unravel, he became increasingly desperate. He began leaving threatening voicemails, sending hostile emails, and even had his lawyer contact mine with outlandish claims about my mental stability and fitness to manage our joint assets. "He's panicking," Sarah observed, after a particularly vicious legal exchange. "People like Thomas rely on control and intimidation. When that fails, they often escalate before they break." The escalation came sooner than expected. Thomas's firm was hosting their annual client appreciation event, an elegant affair at a downtown hotel that I had helped plan in previous years. Though I was no longer welcome as Thomas's wife, Jill had been invited through her advertising connections and asked me to accompany her. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I asked, uncertain about confronting Thomas in such a public setting. "You can't hide forever," Jill pointed out. "Besides, it might be useful to see how he's presenting himself professionally right now." She was right. I needed to reclaim my public life, to stop allowing Thomas's presence to dictate where I could and couldn't go. I chose my outfit carefully, a sleek black dress I had purchased with my first paycheck from my new contract job, something Thomas had never seen. The evening of the event arrived, and I entered the hotel ballroom with Jill at my side, heart pounding but head held high. I spotted Thomas immediately, standing near the bar with several colleagues. He hadn't seen me yet. As I watched, Jessica entered from the opposite side of the room, looking elegant in a maternity dress that accentuated her growing baby bump. Thomas's expression when he saw her was priceless, pure panic, followed quickly by forced composure as he made his way toward her, presumably to manage this unexpected situation. Before he could reach her, Jessica spotted me, and to my surprise, smiled and waved, heading in my direction. This was definitely not part of our plan, but I smiled back, curious to see what would happen. Thomas froze mid-step, his gaze darting between Jessica approaching me and his colleagues watching with interest. His carefully compartmentalized worlds were colliding spectacularly in public, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Annemarie," Jessica said warmly, reaching me before Thomas could intercept her. "I'm so glad you're here. I was hoping we might have a chance to talk more about the foundation." Clever girl. She was creating a plausible reason for our acquaintance, one that wouldn't immediately raise suspicions. "Of course," I replied smoothly. "I've been reviewing those documents we discussed." Thomas finally reached us, his face a mask of barely contained fury beneath a strained smile. "Jessica, Annemarie," he said tightly. "What a surprise to see you both here." "Is it really a surprise, Thomas?" I asked innocently. "Considering your firm organized the event, and Jessica is carrying your child, and I helped plan these gatherings for years." Several heads turned at the word child, including those of Thomas's senior partners. The color drained from his face. "Perhaps we should talk privately," he suggested, his voice low and threatening. "I don't think so," Jessica replied before I could. "I think we've all had quite enough private conversations with you. Your wife and I have been having some fascinating discussions lately." The emphasis on wife was subtle but unmistakable. More heads turned. Thomas's world was unraveling thread by thread in front of the very colleagues he had been defrauding. "You don't know what you're doing," Thomas hissed, dropping all pretense of civility. "Actually, we know exactly what we're doing," I countered calmly. "Just as we know exactly what you've been doing with the firm's clients, with the accounting, with the hidden properties." Thomas's face went from white to red in an instant. "You're making a huge mistake," he threatened, stepping closer. "Both of you." "The only mistake was trusting you," Jessica said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "But we're correcting that now." Before Thomas could respond, one of the senior partners approached our tense group. "Thomas, a word please," he said firmly. "Now." As Thomas was led away, Jessica and I exchanged small, victorious smiles. We hadn't planned this confrontation, but it had unfolded perfectly, forcing Thomas to face the consequences of his actions in the most public way possible. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Thomas's firm had expanded their investigation based on the evidence I had provided, uncovering a pattern of financial mismanagement dating back years. Criminal charges were being considered. Meanwhile, our divorce case proceeded, with Sarah presenting overwhelming evidence of Thomas's financial misconduct and deception. His attempts to paint me as unstable fell apart under scrutiny, especially when Jessica testified about his parallel relationship with her and the lies he had told them both. The judge was unimpressed with Thomas's explanations and tactics. In my 20 years on the bench, she remarked during one hearing, "I have rarely seen such calculated deception and disregard for fiduciary duty in a marriage." As the walls closed in around him, Thomas made one final desperate move. "Mark called me late one evening, his voice urgent. "Thomas just called to say goodbye," he reported. "He said he's had enough of being persecuted and is going somewhere to start fresh. I think he's planning to flee the country, Annemarie." I immediately called Sarah, who contacted the district attorney handling the embezzlement investigation. Hours later, I received confirmation. Thomas had been arrested at the airport, attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country with forged travel documents and nearly $100,000 in cash. The final twist was discovering that the embezzlement wasn't his only crime. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of financial fraud against former clients, individuals who had trusted Thomas with significant sums for projects that were never completed as promised. Some of these cases dated back to before our marriage, confirming what Ellen had suggested about Thomas's character being flawed long before I entered his life. As I watched the news report of his arrest, I felt no joy, no sense of victory, only a profound sadness for the years I had lost and the person I had believed Thomas to be. But beneath the sadness was something stronger and more enduring. The knowledge that I had survived, that I had fought back, and that I was already building something new from the ashes of his betrayal. 6 months after the elevator incident that changed my life forever, I stood in the courtroom as the judge finalized my divorce from Thomas. The terms were overwhelmingly in my favor, with clear acknowledgement of Thomas's financial misconduct and deception. I was awarded our house, which I had already decided to sell, along with a substantial portion of the hidden assets that had been uncovered during the investigation. Thomas wasn't present for the hearing. He remained in custody awaiting trial on multiple charges of embezzlement and fraud. According to Mark, who still visited him occasionally out of a sense of loyalty I couldn't quite understand, Thomas had aged years in months, his confident facade crumbling under the weight of his actions. As I left the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly, but free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the false reality I had been living in for years without knowing it. My graphic design business had flourished in the aftermath of the divorce. The contract work with Jill's firm had led to more projects, and I had recently hired an assistant to help manage the growing workload. I was considering expanding into a small studio space, a dream I had mentioned to Thomas years ago, but had set aside in favor of supporting his career. The house sold quickly, allowing me to purchase a smaller but charming condo in a neighborhood I had always loved. It was mine alone, decorated according to my taste without compromise. Each piece of furniture, each color choice, was a small act of reclaiming my identity. With Jessica's help, I had managed to recover most of my grandmother's jewelry and family heirlooms, which Thomas had hidden rather than sold. Our unlikely friendship had deepened over the months, bonded by shared trauma but also by mutual respect and understanding. Jessica's baby, a daughter named Lily, had been born 2 months ago. Though the circumstances were complicated, I felt no resentment toward the innocent child. If anything, I hoped she would grow up with a stronger, wiser mother because of what Jessica had endured and overcome. "She'll never know Thomas," Jessica had told me firmly during our coffee meeting last week. "I've already filed for sole custody given his criminal charges. I don't want her anywhere near his influence." I had nodded, understanding completely. Thomas's pattern of manipulation and deceit was too ingrained, too fundamental to his character, to risk exposing a child to it. Jessica was making the difficult but right choice to protect her daughter. Today marked another milestone in my recovery. I had agreed to meet Mark and his wife for dinner, the first social engagement with our former mutual friends since the divorce. Many had taken sides during the ugliest parts of the separation, but as Thomas's crimes became public knowledge, most had reached out to apologize for doubting my version of events. I was learning to forgive, not for Thomas's sake, but for my own. Carrying anger and resentment would only give him continued power over my emotional life, something I refused to allow. As I prepared for dinner, I caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled at the woman looking back at me. She was stronger than the woman who had stepped into that elevator a year ago, more confident, more self-aware. She had weathered a storm that should have broken her and emerged not just intact but improved. My phone buzzed with a text from Jill. 1-year anniversary of the elevator incident next week. Freedom celebration at my place? I laughed out loud. Leave it to Jill to suggest commemorating what had been the most painful day of my life. But she wasn't wrong. That day, as horrible as it had been, had freed me from a marriage built on lies. It had forced me to confront truths I might otherwise have remained blind to for years more. In its own way, it had been a gift. A painful, unwanted gift, but one that had ultimately led me to a more authentic life. Count me in, I texted back. I'll bring the champagne. Later that evening, as I shared a meal with friends who had known both the old and new versions of me, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. When those elevator doors had opened on the 5th floor, revealing Thomas with Jessica, I had thought my life was ending. In reality, it was just beginning. I had learned lessons I never wanted to learn about trust, betrayal, and resilience. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, and built a support system of authentic relationships to replace the false one that had collapsed around me. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you directly to what you truly need. My marriage to Thomas had been comfortable, but based on illusions. Its end, while traumatic, had forced me to build something real and lasting. A life that was genuinely mine, choices that reflected my true values, and relationships founded on honesty rather than convenience or manipulation. A week later, I found myself back in the elevator of Jill's building, riding up to her apartment for the freedom celebration. As the elevator stopped at the 5th floor, I held my breath momentarily, half expecting to relive that terrible moment. But when the doors opened, there was only an elderly couple who smiled politely as they entered. I smiled back, feeling the last of the elevator's power over me dissolving. It was just a box of metal and cables now, not the scene of my life's greatest trauma. When I arrived at Jill's apartment, I was surprised to find not just a small gathering as I had expected, but a proper party. Friends, colleagues, even Ellen, Thomas's mother, who had become a surprising source of support and wisdom throughout the divorce. To Annemarie, Jill toasted once everyone had arrived, raising her glass high, who turned an ending into a beginning, a disaster into an opportunity, and showed all of us what real strength looks like. As glasses clinked around me, I felt a rush of gratitude for these people who had stood by me, believed me, and helped me rebuild when everything had fallen apart. They were my real treasure, worth far more than any house or savings account or marriage certificate. Later, as the party wound down, Jessica pulled me aside, baby Lily sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small package. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny elevator. I looked up at her, confused. "Hear me out," Jessica said, smiling at my expression. "That elevator changed both our lives. It was terrible and shocking, but it was also the moment the truth began. Everything since then has been hard, but real. I thought we should commemorate that. I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, understanding her perspective. That elevator had indeed been the dividing line between living in comfortable illusion and facing difficult reality. Without it, who knows how much more time and love I would have wasted on a man who had never truly existed except in my imagination. 2 elevators, I said, touching the charm lightly, and to the truths they sometimes reveal. As I left Jill's building that night, I paused in the lobby, looking at the elevator doors. Then, deliberately, I turned and took the stairs instead. Not out of fear or avoidance, but because I had learned that sometimes the harder path is the one that makes you stronger. My life wasn't perfect. I still had moments of anger and sadness about the years I had lost with Thomas. I still questioned my judgment sometimes, wondering how I could have been so thoroughly deceived. But these doubts no longer defined me or limited my ability to move forward. If you're going through something similar, something that feels like it might break you, know this: you are stronger than you realize. The very moment that seems to be destroying your life might actually be saving it, forcing you to build something more authentic and meaningful than what came before. Trust your instincts, lean on friends who truly see you, and remember that your value has never depended on someone else's ability to recognize it. Have you ever experienced a moment of shocking clarity that changed everything? A time when painful truth ultimately led to something better than comfortable illusion? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that even the most painful endings can lead to beautiful new beginnings. Thank you for listening, and may your own journey, whatever its challenges, lead you to exactly where you're meant to be.